Question number 7, Phil Twyford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is for the Minister for Building and Housing. Does he agree with KPMG that banks are warning that the significant deals done at ridiculous pricing for New Zealand land and property could spell disaster for them?
Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, on the face of it, no, I don't actually agree with KPMG, although I'm not exactly sure what they mean. If banks feel that they are lending money on, quote, significant deals done at ridiculous pricing, then they shouldn't be, and it would be their own fault if it led to disaster. But in fact, they are subject to a fairly detailed supervisory regime, which is intended to ensure that they don't take significant risks at ridiculous pricing in their lending.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Phil Twyford.
Does he agree with KPMG that, and I quote, "The risk for New Zealand is that while all this money comes flooding in and creates overinflated prices, New Zealanders are forced to buy at these overinflated prices. That's leading to a sense of hopelessness among some young people about ever owning a home. And if so, why won't he do something about that flood instead of just tinkering with the RMA and selling off state houses?"
Well, Mr Speaker, there is KPMG haven't produced much evidence to back up the statements that there's, quote, a flood of investment. Although you don't have to go too far, though, to find a young couple who do find it a struggle to buy their first home. That is why, particularly in Auckland, because they can buy them a lot more easily in other centres. That is why the government is focusing strongly and increasingly successfully on improving the flexibility of supply of land, reduction of consenting costs and reduction of building costs so that we can have more affordable homes, particularly for low and middle income earners who've actually had a problem for quite a while, and it's good that the member has now noticed.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Phil Twyford.
What is he doing about the pressures of offshore speculators driving the price of housing out of reach of young first home buyers and creating a risk to the whole economy?
Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, we're doing what we've described many times in this House, and that is as a top priority, focusing on expanding the supply of land and the more ready availability of low and moderate value homes, particularly in the Auckland market, which we're doing through special housing areas. We'll have the opportunity to do through more rapid development of the state housing areas in Auckland, and we're getting good cooperation from the Auckland Council, and as indicated by the number of consents, starting to make some real progress, but there is a lot more to do.
Order, Mr Speaker.
Point of order, Phil Twyford.
My question asked what the government was doing about the pressures of offshore speculators. That was not addressed in the answer.
Order was.
No? Offshore speculators.
The Minister then went on and said exactly what they were doing. Now, whether that, in the member's mind, addresses that is a satisfactory answer, but clearly the question was addressed.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Phil Twyford.
Now that the banks and KPMG say that offshore speculators are a problem, and now that Tony Abbott's centre-right government in Australia has announced a tax on foreign buyers, a register of foreign property ownership and tough penalties for those who break the law, will he reconsider his policy, or is this just another case of him being right and everyone else wrong?
Honourable Bill English.
No, Mr Speaker, it's a case of focusing on the highest priority, the issue that will make the biggest difference. The fact is in Australia that the work being done to put together a foreign buying register has had absolutely no impact on house prices in their main cities, where actually the underlying issue is supply, and that is why we continue to focus on it. You can of course make some adjustments to demand, but it is the case that in a strong economy where incomes are rising and interest rates are at 50-year lows, people are willing to pay more for houses. It's actually in that respect, it's a sign of success.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Phil Twyford.
Is it a sign of success when the ASB Bank says that Auckland house prices are now, and I quote, a critical financial stability issue, unquote, meaning that people's debt levels are getting too high to handle a fall in house prices. And the Reserve Bank warns of a sharp correction in house prices. Is it time for him to admit that the Auckland housing market is out of control and his policy has failed?
Mr. Speaker,
Bill English.
no, the ASB, of course, has the choice of not making silly lending decisions and stoking along the market if it's believed that that's what's happening. They should not be taking big risks with shareholder capital and depositors' money. I'm pleased the members now noticed there's a challenge in the housing market because the government started working on it 4 years ago with the Productivity Commission inquiry, followed by the Special Housing Areas legislation, which Labor opposed. But others are working constructively with the government, such as the Auckland City Council, and we're starting to make some real progress. And the members should support the government's efforts instead of opposing them.
Move up to the program, Phil.
Question number 8, Sarah Dowie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.